The rain slammed into the side of the jet like thrown gravel. Inside the cockpit, the air was tighter than the weather outside. Too quiet. Too controlled. The kind of silence that only exists right before something breaks. Richard Coleman didn't turn around when the cockpit door opened. He heard it anyway. The soft hydraulic hiss. The pause. The presence. He knew someone was standing there. "You're late," Richard said, eyes fixed on the glowing flight displays. His voice was flat, sharp, not raised, worse than that, dismissive. The woman in the doorway didn't answer right away. She took one step forward. The cockpit lights caught the edge of her uniform. Navy blue. Perfectly pressed, gold stripes clean, unwrinkled like they had never been doubted. Her posture was straight, not stiff, controlled, as if gravity itself respected her. Richard finally glanced over his shoulder and froze, not because he didn't recognize her, because he did, just not in the way that mattered. She was black, early 30s, calm face, steady eyes, no smile, no apology, no nervous energy. Nothing he expected to see standing in his cockpit before a transatlantic flight. His gaze moved fast. Her face, her hands, her shoulders, the insignia on her chest. Then it hardened. "You with cleaning?" he asked. The words landed heavy, ugly, casual in the way only practiced disrespect can be. She didn't flinch. "No," she said. Her voice was even, low, American, Midwest neutral. The kind that didn't try to sound important because it didn't need to. "I'm First Officer Maya Reynolds. I'm assigned to this leg." For half a second, nothing moved. The avionics fans hummed. Rain rattled harder against the windshield. Somewhere behind the cockpit wall, a catering cart clinked metal against metal. Richard let out a breath through his nose. A short laugh. Not humor. Disbelief. "That's funny," he said. "Because I requested a senior first officer. Operations confirmed it." Maya stepped fully into the cockpit now. The door slid shut behind her with a dull mechanical thud that felt louder than it should have. She set her flight bag down in the right seat. The co-pilot's seat, her seat. Leather creaked under the weight. Richard's jaw tightened. "I don't fly with trainees," he said, "especially not on a Gulf Stream. This isn't some regional hop. This is a 7,000-mile ocean crossing in bad weather." "I'm aware," Maya said. She reached forward and adjusted the rudder pedals. Small movements. Precise muscle memory, the kind that comes from repetition, not rehearsal. Richard stood up so fast, his headset slid off the console and hit the floor. He loomed over her. Tall, broad shoulders, silver hair cropped tight. The posture of a man who had never been questioned in this space. "You look young," he said, "and you look inexperienced." Maya looked up at him, slowly. Her eyes didn't widen, didn't blink fast, didn't drop. "Captain Coleman," she said, "I'm type-rated on this aircraft. I have over 4,000 hours. If you'd like to review my logbook, you can do it after we run the checklist." The word captain hit him wrong. He hated how calm she was. "I didn't ask for your resume," Richard snapped. I asked for someone who fits the cockpit. Fits. The word hung there, heavy, loaded. Maya felt it. Of course she did. She'd heard it before. Different cities, different cockpits, same word, same meaning. Richard turned away from her and reached for the radio. Tower, he said, keying the mic. This is November 700 Alpha, requesting immediate crew reassignment. Maya's head turned slightly. For what reason? She asked. Richard didn't look at her. Loss of confidence, he said. I don't trust the assignment. The radio crackled back, confused, delayed, bureaucratic. Maya pulled a small notebook from her pocket, leather-bound, worn at the edges. She clicked a pen and wrote down the time. Richard noticed. What are you doing? He asked. Documenting, she said. Refusal to fly without cause. His laugh this time was louder. Barking. You don't document me, he said. I'm the captain. I decide who sits in this seat. He jabbed a finger toward the right side. That seat is earned, he continued. Not handed out because someone upstairs wants to look progressive. There it was. The word progressive said like a disease. Maya inhaled. Slow. Controlled. Outside the cockpit, footsteps stopped. Someone lingered. Sarah Mitchell, the flight attendant, hovered just beyond the door. Early 40s, 10 years with the company. She'd learned when to stay silent. She'd also learned when silence was dangerous. She knocked lightly. Captain, she said, pushing the door open just enough to see both of them. The client's car is 5 minutes out. Richard straightened his jacket, smoothed his tie. Good, he said. We're fixing a problem. Sarah glanced at Maya, then back at Richard. She felt it immediately. The tension, the imbalance, the unspoken line being drawn. Is everything okay? She asked. No. Maya said at the same time Richard said, Yes. Richard shot Maya a warning look. Sarah swallowed. Richard turned back to the radio. Dispatch sent me a liability, he said. I won't fly with her. The word liability cut deeper than the insult before it. Maya's pen paused mid-air. Sarah's hand tightened on the doorframe. There it was. Not subtle, not coded. Plain. Public. On a recorded line. Richard didn't know that yet. He thought this was power, thought this was protection, thought this was him doing his job. He had no idea he was standing on ground he didn't own. And Maya Reynolds, sitting quietly in the right seat, already knew exactly how this was going to end. Not because she was angry, but because she was prepared. The rain kept falling. The jet waited. And the first mistake had already been made. The radio went quiet after Richard released the mic, but the silence that followed was worse. It pressed in from every surface. The glass, the panels, the narrow space between two seats that suddenly felt like a courtroom. Maya capped her pen and slipped the notebook back into her pocket. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Not defensive. Controlled. The kind of control that comes from knowing you are being watched and choosing not to perform. Richard noticed anyway. Put that away, he said. Maya didn't respond. He turned, eyes sharp. I said, put it away. I already did, she replied. Sarah was still standing in the doorway, half in, half out, like someone who had wandered into the wrong room at the wrong moment. Her eyes flicked between them. She'd seen captains lose their tempers before. She'd seen ego. She'd seen stress. This was different. This was personal. Richard rolled his shoulders like he was loosening up before a fight. Sarah, he said, voice smooth now, professional again. Why don't you make sure the cabin is ready? We're going to be a bit delayed. Sarah hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. Long enough for Maya to notice. Yes, Captain, Sarah said quietly. She stepped back and pulled the door closed, but not before Maya caught the look she gave her. A look that said, I see it. I'm sorry. I don't know what to do. The latch clicked. Sealed. Richard exhaled and finally sat back down in the left seat. He adjusted the seat height. The armrests claimed the space again. You're not flying this plane, he said. So you can either walk off now with some dignity, or we can make this official and ugly. Maya didn't move. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far off, low and distant, like a warning that hadn't decided whether to arrive yet. I'm on the manifest, she said. I filed the flight plan. The fuel is loaded. The aircraft is legal only with 2 crew. Richard smiled thinly. I've flown worse weather with less. That would be illegal, Maya replied. And you know it. He leaned toward her, lowering his voice. I've been flying longer than you've been alive, he said. I know exactly what's legal and what gets overlooked. There it was again. Age, authority. The unspoken hierarchy he believed the world owed him. Maya looked at him. Really looked this time. The creases at the corners of his eyes. The confidence calcified into entitlement. A man who had been rewarded too long without being questioned. You don't trust me, she said. I don't, Richard replied instantly. Too fast, too certain. Why? It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't raised. It was a question. Clean, sharp, surgical. Richard's jaw worked. I don't see a pilot, he said finally. I see risk. Maya nodded once, like she was filing that away. You see what you expect to see, she said. His laugh was short, bitter. I see patterns, he shot back. I see what happens when standards get lowered, when seats get filled to make people feel good instead of keeping people alive. Maya's fingers curled slightly against her thigh. Not anger. Restraint. You're saying I'm not qualified, she said, or you're saying you don't like how I look. Richard didn't answer. He reached for the sat phone instead. Dispatch, he said as it rang. It's Coleman. We have a problem. Maya watched him pace the narrow space behind the seats, his boots heavy against the cockpit floor. He spoke loudly now, confidently, like he wanted her to hear every word. You sent me Reynolds? Yeah. That one. I'm not taking off with her. No, I don't care what her file says. I'm telling you it's a bad call. Pause. He rolled his eyes. She's argumentative. She's arrogant. She doesn't fit the cockpit dynamic. Another pause. Don't make this about optics, he snapped. This is safety. Maya felt it then, the familiar tightening in her chest. Not panic. Recognition. The same shape, the same rhythm. She'd carried through flight schools, interviews, simulators. The unspoken rule that she would always have, to be better just to be equal. Richard turned his back to her, lowering his voice conspiratorially. The client's paying a lot of money, he said into the phone. Do you really want him stepping on board and seeing a kid in the right seat? He wants experience. He wants confidence. Maya closed her eyes for a brief second, just long enough to steady herself. Richard hung up and slammed the phone back into its cradle. There, he said. I've requested a replacement. Senior. White glove. You can wait in the terminal. I'm not leaving the aircraft, Maya replied. That stopped him. He turned slowly. You will, he said. One way or another. Maya stood then. She wasn't small, not towering, but solid, grounded. When she rose, the space shifted. The power balance changed in a way Richard hadn't anticipated. I will step out of the cockpit, she said evenly, so you can de-escalate. But I am not abandoning my duty. If you step out, Richard said, his voice hardening, you step onto the tarmac. And if you're still on board when the client arrives, I'll have you escorted off. You'd have me arrested, Maya said. For doing my job, for trespassing, he snapped. This is my aircraft. The word my hung there, dangerous and wrong. Maya met his gaze. You're making a mistake, she said quietly. Richard scoffed. The mistake was hiring you. She picked up her flight bag and walked past him into the cabin. The interior was a study in wealth, cream leather, polished wood, soft lighting that made everything look calm, expensive, untouchable. The smell of fresh flowers mixed with aviation fuel and rain-soaked concrete. Maya set her bag down in the first row and sat, crossed her legs, folded her hands. Richard followed her out, face flushed. What are you doing? He demanded. Waiting, she said. I want to hear how you explain the delay. You're not a passenger, he snapped. Then don't treat me like one, she replied. Before he could respond, headlights washed across the cabin windows. A long black sedan pulling up to the stairs, rainwater spraying from its tires. Sarah's voice came over the intercom, tight with nerves. Captain, the client has arrived. Richard swore under his breath. He leaned toward Maya, lowering his voice to a hiss. If you say one word, he warned, I will end your career before it starts. Maya didn't answer. She smoothed the crease in her trousers and looked toward the door. Richard straightened his jacket, wiped his palms and put on his captain's face. The charming one, the confident one, the one that had carried him through decades without consequence. He stepped forward to greet the man who would unknowingly decide his fate. Maya sat still. The storm outside had begun to pass. Inside, it was only getting worse. The cabin door opened, and the sound of rain followed him inside. Daniel Whitmore didn't rush. He never did. Men who owned time didn't move fast unless they chose to. He stepped out of the car, handed off his umbrella without looking at the assistant who reached for it, and climbed the stairs with measured certainty. His shoes were Italian leather, dark and uncafort. His coat was heavy wool, cut sharp, expensive without shouting. 62 years old. Silver at the temples, eyes that missed nothing. Richard met him at the threshold with a practiced smile already in place. "Mr. Whitmore," Richard said warmly, "welcome aboard." Daniel nodded once. Brief, efficient. His eyes slid past Richard and into the cabin. He took in the space in less than a second. The layout, the lighting, the stillness. Then his gaze landed on Maya. She sat in the first row, calm, composed, reading a technical manual, like the world hadn't just tilted around her. She didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, didn't perform. Daniel paused, not long enough for anyone else to notice, long enough for him to register something that didn't align. Richard stepped slightly to the side, trying to block the sight line. "We've run into a minor issue," Richard said smoothly. "Nothing serious, just being cautious." Daniel didn't answer right away. He stepped fully into the cabin, rainwater still clinging faintly to the hem of his coat. He handed it to Sarah without breaking eye contact with Richard. "What kind of issue?" Daniel asked. "Sensor anomaly," Richard replied. "Hydraulics, likely nothing. But safety comes first." Daniel hummed quietly, a sound that meant he was listening, not agreeing. He took his seat across from Maya without asking permission. The leather creaked softly under his weight. He placed his briefcase beside him, set his phone on the table, and checked his watch. "You're telling me this aircraft has a mechanical issue," Daniel said. "Yet there is no maintenance crew in sight." "They're on the way," Richard said quickly. "Delayed by the weather." Daniel's eyes flicked to the window. The rain had slowed to a mist. "Interesting," he said, "because I've been delayed 3 times this month by men who thought I wouldn't check." Richard felt a bead of sweat slide down his spine. "I assure you," he said, "this is standard procedure." Daniel turned then, finally, toward Maya. "And you are," he asked, "standard procedure as well?" Maya closed the manual gently. The sound was soft. Final. "Maya Reynolds," she said. "First officer." Richard cut in immediately. "Trainee," he said. "Deadheading back to base. Scheduling error." Daniel's brow creased slightly. "Trainees usually don't read flight control law manuals for leisure," he said. Maya met his eyes for the first time. Calm, direct. "Captain Coleman prefers a specific profile in the cockpit," she said. "I don't fit it." The air shifted. Sarah froze where she stood. Richard laughed too loudly. "She's being dramatic," he said. "We all know how these situations get blown out of proportion." Daniel didn't look at him. "How many hours?" Daniel asked Maya. 4,000, she replied. "Type rated on this aircraft." Silence stretched. Daniel leaned back slightly, studying her now. Not her clothes, not her posture, her composure. "And the sensor?" he asked. "Is it real?" Maya didn't hesitate. "No," Richard snapped. "That is enough," he said sharply. "You do not discuss technical matters with the client." Daniel raised one finger without looking at him. "She speaks when I ask," he said. Richard shut his mouth. Maya continued. "If there were a fault," she said, "there would be an alert on the crew alerting system. There isn't. The synoptic page is clean. All pressures nominal. All quantities green." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're certain?" "Yes." Richard stepped forward. "She's overstepping," he said. "This is exactly the kind of attitude that concerns me." Daniel turned his head slightly. "Captain," he said quietly, "you're sweating." Richard flushed. "It's warm," he snapped. Daniel picked up his glass of water and took a sip. "I don't tolerate lies," he said. "I tolerate mistakes. I tolerate weather. I tolerate delay when it's real. What I don't tolerate is being managed." Richard's throat tightened. "She's manipulating you," he said. "She wants the seat, that's all." Maya stood. Not abruptly. Not aggressively. She rose like someone who had decided something long ago and was simply following through. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Captain Coleman grounded this aircraft because he refuses to fly with a black woman." The words landed heavy. Undeniable. Clear. Sarah gasped softly. Richard exploded. "You do not get to say that," he shouted. "Get out of my aircraft right now." Daniel didn't flinch. "Is that true?" he asked Richard. Richard's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. "She's twisting it," he said. "I'm exercising command authority." Daniel stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, not kindly. "You're refusing to fly," Daniel said, "over a personal grievance." "I'm protecting you," Richard insisted. "These diversity hires panic under pressure." Maya didn't react. Daniel's smile vanished. "That's a dangerous thing to say," he said, "and an even more dangerous thing to believe." Richard felt the floor tilt under him. "I'm grounding the aircraft," he said desperately, "until a proper first officer arrives." "Who?" Daniel asked. "Hoffman," Richard said. "He's driving in." Daniel checked his watch again. "How far?" "Connecticut." "That's 3 hours," Daniel said. "Yes," Richard said. "Safety takes time." Daniel stood. He was not a tall man, but when he rose, the cabin seemed to shrink around him. "You've just cost yourself something," he said. Richard scoffed. "You can't fire me," he said. "You don't even own this jet." Maya reached into her blazer and pulled out her phone. She didn't look at Richard. "Leonard," she said as the call connected. "Pull the ownership file for tail number November 700 Alpha." Richard laughed. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's bluffing." There was a pause on the line. Then a voice came through, tight and uncertain. "The aircraft is owned by Reynolds Aviation Holdings," Leonard said. "Principal signatory is Maya Reynolds." Silence. The kind that steals oxygen. Richard's face drained of color. "What?" he whispered. Maya lowered the phone. "I bought it 3 weeks ago," she said. "I wanted to see how your crews behaved when they thought no one important was watching." Daniel exhaled slowly. Richard staggered back a step. You're just," he stammered. "The owner," Maya said. and a captain. She turned to Daniel. "If you'll allow me," she said, "we can be airborne in 10 minutes." Daniel smiled. Richard collapsed into the seat. The storm outside was gone. Inside, everything had just begun. Richard Coleman sat frozen, his hands gripping the armrests as if the chair might slide out from under him. The cockpit felt smaller now, claustrophobic, like the walls had leaned in to listen. Daniel Whitmore didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You lied to me," he said. Each word was measured. Clean. Deadly. Richard swallowed. "Sir, I was acting in your best interest." Daniel turned his head slowly, eyes sharp as broken glass. "You decided my best interest for me." Maya was already moving. She stepped past Richard into the cockpit with the quiet confidence of someone returning to a space that had always been hers. She took the left seat without ceremony, adjusted it once, checked the mirrors, ran her hand lightly over the yoke. Familiar. Natural. The machine responded to her presence like it recognized its owner. Richard watched, helpless. "You can't do this," he said hoarsely. "I'm the captain." Maya didn't look at him. "You were," she said. The words landed without malice, without triumph, just fact. Daniel leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. He looked at Richard, the way he looked at underperforming executives in boardrooms. Not angry. Disappointed. "Let me explain something to you," Daniel said. "I've spent 40 years building companies. I've fired people who cost me money. I've fired people who embarrassed me. But the ones I remove immediately are the ones who lie and believe their lie is justified." Richard shook his head. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Daniel said. "This is exposure." Maya keyed the intercom. Her voice filled the cabin, steady and authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We'll be departing shortly. Thank you for your patience." The word captain echoed. Sarah stood in the aisle, eyes wide, one hand pressed to her mouth. She looked at Maya, then at Richard, then back again, piecing together the impossible in real time. Richard stood abruptly. "You can't just take over." "There are procedures." "There are," Maya said calmly, "and you violated them." He stepped toward her. "Too close. You set me up," he hissed. "This was a trap." Maya finally turned to face him. "No," she said. "This was a test. You failed it." Daniel straightened. "Captain Coleman," he said, "you are relieved of duty. Effective immediately." Richard laughed, sharp and cracked. "You don't have the authority." Daniel smiled faintly. "I do." Richard looked around the cockpit like a man searching for an exit that no longer existed. "You can't fly without me," he said desperately. "This is a two-crew aircraft." Maya reached for her phone again. "Already handled," she said. She tapped once, waited. The cockpit door opened moments later, and a younger man stepped in, breathless, rain still clinging to his jacket. Mid-40s, athletic, calm eyes. "Chris," Maya said. "Right seat." Chris grinned. Wouldn't miss it. Richard stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" "Former Navy," Chris said easily. "Fully rated. And not interested in your problems." Richard backed away. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, voice breaking. "You'll hear from the union." Maya nodded. "You should call them." Daniel checked his watch. "You have 60 seconds to vacate the aircraft." Richard's chest heaved. He looked at Sarah, searching for sympathy. She stepped back. He looked at Chris. Chris didn't blink. Finally, he grabbed his flight bag. His movements were frantic now, clumsy. The confidence that had filled him an hour ago was gone, replaced by something small and panicked. As he passed Maya, he leaned in close. "You ruined me," he whispered. She met his gaze, unflinching. "You did that yourself." Richard stormed down the aisle. The cabin was silent as he passed, passengers watching with the kind of curiosity reserved for public falls from grace. At the door he hesitated, turned back one last time. Maya was already running the checklist. He stepped out into the night. The door closed behind him with a final unforgiving click. 10 minutes later, the engine spooled. Maya's hands were steady on the controls. Chris read out speeds. The jet surged forward, powerful and smooth, lifting cleanly into the dark sky. In the cabin, Daniel sipped his drink and watched the lights of New Jersey fall away. "That," he said quietly, "was impressive." Maya didn't smile. It was necessary. The flight was flawless. No turbulence, no drama. Just precision. When they landed in London, Daniel shook her hand firmly. "You'll be hearing from my office," he said. "I prefer to do business with people who don't flinch." She nodded. "Likewise." Back in New York, Richard sat in a bar near the airport, replaying the night on his phone to anyone who would listen. He told a story where he was the victim, where he stood his ground, where he was pushed out by political correctness and money. He didn't know the video existed. Maya watched it later that night from her hotel room. The footage was clear. Every word, every glance, every lie. She closed her laptop. The storm had passed. Now came the reckoning. The first post went up before sunrise. Richard Coleman sat hunched over a sticky bar table near the airport, his tie loosened, his phone glowing too bright in the dim room. He typed fast, angry, precise in the way only a man convinced of his own righteousness could be. Anonymous username. Aviation forum he'd trusted for years. A place where grievances were currency and outrage was validation. Senior captain forced off flight by billionaire owner. Safety compromised. Standards collapsing. He hit post and leaned back, ordering another drink. In his version of events, he was the last professional in a corrupted system. The hero who refused to bend. He didn't mention the censor that never existed, didn't mention the word he almost said, didn't mention the way his voice shook when the truth surfaced. Within minutes, replies appeared. Supportive, furious, familiar. About time someone stood up to this nonsense. Affirmative action is killing aviation. I wouldn't fly with her either. Richard felt the knot in his chest loosen for the first time since the tarmac. This was where he belonged, among men who understood him, men who saw the world the way he did. Across the ocean, Maya Reynolds was awake too. London was still dark outside her hotel window. The city muted and distant, lights reflected in the glass like a second skyline hovering over her room. She sat on the edge of the bed in silence, phone in her hand, watching notifications stack up. Messages from Leonard, from legal, from pilots she barely knew, from women who did. Have you seen this? Is this about you? He's telling people you're unsafe. Maya opened the forum link, read the thread once, then again, slowly, line by line. She felt the familiar heat in her stomach, not panic, not fear, but resolve. This wasn't new. What was new was the scale, the speed. Richard had gone public. He wanted noise. He wanted doubt. He wanted to poison the water before she could speak. Maya stood and walked to the desk, opened her laptop. The screen lit her face, cool and steady. She logged into the secure cloud tied to the aircraft's systems. The one no one else knew existed. The one she'd installed quietly, deliberately, years ago, after watching too many men walk away from too many incidents with clean hands and rewritten stories. The file list loaded. Date, time, tail number. She clicked play. The cockpit filled her room. High definition, wide angle. Every detail sharp. The hum of avionics, the rain. Richard's voice, unmistakable. I see a diversity statistic that's going to get us killed. Maya watched without flinching. Watched him lie to dispatch. Watched him pace. Watched the moment his confidence cracked when the ownership file appeared. Watched herself stay calm. Stay still. Stay in control. She closed the file. For a moment, she considered sending it only to the company, letting the process work, letting it be quiet. Then she opened the forum again, scrolled. She bought her license. Money talks now. Safety is dead. Maya exhaled. No, she said softly to the empty room. Not this time. She opened her editing software. Didn't cut, didn't splice, didn't dramatize. She added simple captions. White text, black background. Captain Coleman claimed the aircraft was unsafe. Here is the cockpit. She exported the file. The upload bar crept forward. While it loaded, she poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window. London was waking up. Buses starting. Lights dimming. A city built on centuries of power shifts and quiet reckonings. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Whitmore. Saw the forum. Do what you need to do. The upload finished. Maya posted the video, tagged the charter company, tagged the aviation authority, tagged the forums where the lies were spreading fastest. Then she closed the laptop. Back in New Jersey, Richard was laughing. He had an audience now. A man next to him slapped the bar and nodded at his phone. Man, you're blowing up, he said. People are pissed. Richard grinned. Good. They should be. His phone buzzed. Once, twice again. He frowned, looked down. A link from his union rep. He tapped it. The bar noise faded. The video loaded. His voice filled the tiny speaker. Clear, sharp, unforgiving. I don't fly with liabilities. Richard's face drained of color. He looked up. The bartender was staring at his own phone. So was the man at the end of the bar. A woman, 2 stools down, stopped mid-sip, eyes flicking between Richard and her screen. The video kept playing. You don't belong here. Someone whispered his name. Richard dropped the phone. It hit the floor, the screen cracking, but the sound didn't stop. His words echoed anyway. Louder now. Public. Permanent. That's you, the bartender said quietly. Not accusing. Just stating fact. Richard stood, swaying. It's edited, he said. It's fake. No, the bartender replied. It's you. Outside, the sky was brightening. Inside, the room had turned on him. His phone buzzed again. A message from Leonard. Do not come in. HR is terminating your contract. Legal says no contact. Another buzz. From the Aviation Authority. Subject, notice of investigation. Richard backed toward the door, eyes darting, heart racing. The world he'd trusted to protect him had flipped in less than an hour. Across the Atlantic, Maya watched the view count climb. Thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Messages poured in. Support, rage, relief. Women telling her they'd lived this moment 100 times, but never seen it end this way. Men apologizing, others silent. She closed her eyes for a moment. This wasn't victory. It was accountability. And it was only beginning. The investigation moved faster than Richard expected. It always does when the evidence is clean. By mid-morning, his inbox was unusable. Messages stacked on top of each other, unread, unanswered. The subject lines alone were enough to make his hands shake. FAA compliance review. Emergency order. Required statement. He didn't open them at first. He couldn't. He sat in his car outside his apartment, engine off, hands resting uselessly on the steering wheel, watching people pass like nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Inside the federal building downtown, the video played again. And again. And again. Different angles, different time stamps, audio isolated, transcripts generated, words highlighted in yellow like bruises. This wasn't about tone. It wasn't about feelings. It was about facts. Richard Coleman had falsified the airworthiness status of an aircraft. He had misrepresented a mechanical failure to a client. He had attempted to ground a flight without cause. He had used discriminatory language on a recorded line. He had obstructed assigned crew. Each violation stood on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. A senior investigator leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. He didn't just cross the line, he said. He erased it. In London, Maya sat in a glass-walled conference room overlooking the river. The city moved below her, orderly and indifferent. She had slept 3 hours. She hadn't needed more. Daniel Whitmore sat across from her, tablet in hand, scrolling through headlines. He looked satisfied, but not surprised. They're calling it a culture moment, he said. That's generous. This was rot. Maya nodded. Rot survives in silence. Daniel glanced up. You knew this would detonate. Yes, she said. I just didn't know how many people were standing on it. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This one from a junior pilot she'd never met. Thank you for not backing down. Maya set the phone face down. This isn't why I fly, she said quietly. Daniel studied her. Then why do you? She thought for a moment. Because when it's done right, there's no room for ego. Just precision. Trust, accountability. Daniel smiled faintly. Exactly why I'm moving my fleet. He slid a document across the table. Contract transfer. Exclusive operations. Numbers that would make most executives catch their breath. Maya didn't react. I'll review it, she said. Daniel chuckled. Of course you will. Back in New Jersey, Richard finally opened the email marked Emergency Order. The language was cold, formal, absolute. Effective immediately, your airman certificate is suspended pending review. He read it twice, then a third time. Suspended. Not grounded temporarily. Not under review quietly. Suspended. He laughed once. A short, broken sound. This is insane, he muttered to the empty car. His phone rang. Union number. Richard, the voice said carefully. We saw the footage. You're going to fix this, Richard said. This is what you're for. There was a pause. We can't, the voice replied. This is bad. The video leaves no room. Richard's grip tightened on the phone. I've given 30 years to this industry, and this industry is done protecting you, the voice said gently. The line went dead. By afternoon, his name was trending again. Not in the way he'd hoped. Clips of the video cut across platforms. Commentators paused it frame by frame, dissecting his expressions, his words, the moment his authority turned to panic. In one clip, slowed down, you could see it. The exact second he realized he was no longer in control. People noticed. They always do, once they're shown where to look. Maya watched none of it. She was back in the cockpit 2 days later, walking the tarmac with a younger woman at her side. Sofia Alvarez, 26, newly certified, bright eyes, nervous hands. You okay? Maya asked. Sofia nodded too quickly. Yes. I think so. Maya smiled slightly. Good. That means you're paying attention. They climbed the stairs together. The jet gleamed in the sun, freshly painted. New livery on the tail. Clean lines. No ghosts. Inside, everything felt different. Not because the plane had changed, because the atmosphere had. Respect was no longer assumed. It was practiced. Remember, Maya said, as they settled into their seats, confidence is quiet. Arrogance is loud. If someone needs to remind you they're in charge, they're already losing it. Sofia absorbed every word. At the edge of the tarmac, a shuttle bus pulled up. A man stepped off wearing a high-visibility vest, trash picker in hand. He moved slowly, deliberately, like someone careful not to draw attention. Maya didn't see him at first. Then she did. Richard looked older, smaller. His shoulders slumped, eyes hollowed. The gold stripes were gone. The posture, too. He froze when he saw her. Just for a second. Their eyes met across the distance. The jet between them. The sky above them. Everything he had lost, and everything she had built, standing quietly in that moment. Maya gave him a nod. Professional, neutral, final. She turned away and climbed into the cockpit. Richard watched the door close, watched the engines start, watched the aircraft taxi out with a grace he used to take for granted. He stood there, holding a bag of trash as the jet lifted into the air, clean and powerful, disappearing into blue. He would never fly again. Inside the cockpit, Maya checked her instruments, all green, all steady. "Ready," Sophia said. Maya smiled. "Let's go." The sky didn't care who Richard Coleman thought he was, and it never would again. The backlash didn't fade. It organized. What began as outrage hardened into consequence, and consequence has a way of finding paperwork. In Washington, a review board convened behind closed doors. No cameras, no slogans. Just screens, transcripts, and men and women who had spent decades memorizing the difference between error and deception. They watched the footage without commentary. They listened to the audio without interruption. When it ended, no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, the chair cleared his throat. "This isn't about bias training," he said. "This is about integrity." Files were opened. Histories revisited. Patterns traced backward. A complaint from 8 years ago dismissed as miscommunication. A write-up reduced to a warning because the captain was valuable. Another incident settled quietly because the client didn't want attention. Each one insignificant alone. Together, undeniable. Richard Coleman had not fallen from grace in one night. He had been leaning over the edge for years. The emergency order became permanent. Revocation. The word carried weight. Finality. There was no appeal that mattered. No pathway back through simulators or check rides or apologies crafted by lawyers. An airman certificate, once revoked for cause like this, was a door sealed from the other side. Richard read the notice at his kitchen table, the house too quiet around him. The walls were bare now. Photos removed, awards boxed, uniforms folded away like relics from a life no one wanted to remember. He stared at the word until it blurred, then pressed his palms flat against the wood as if grounding himself to something solid. "They can't," he whispered. But they had. His phone rang. Not the union. Not a colleague. His sister. "You need to stop," she said, before he could speak. "You're on the news again." "I didn't do anything wrong," Richard snapped. There was a pause, long enough to hurt. "You did," she said quietly. "And everyone can see it now." She hung up. Outside, the world kept moving. Planes roared overhead, low and constant, reminders of what he had lost. Each sound landed like a verdict. Across the ocean, Maya stood at a lectern she had never asked for. The room was filled with people who had watched the video and decided it meant something larger than one man. Journalists, regulators, pilots, executives, young faces in borrowed suits, older faces carrying histories of silence. She didn't raise her voice. "This isn't about me," she said. "And it's not about punishment." Cameras clicked. Pens scratched. "It's about what we excuse," she continued, "and what we stop excusing." A hand went up. "Do you think the industry is broken?" Maya considered the question. "I think systems reflect who we protect," she said, "and who we challenge. If you only challenge the powerless, the system works exactly as designed." There were murmurs, agreement, discomfort. Another question. "Do you forgive him?" Maya didn't answer right away. "Forgiveness isn't part of the certification process," she said finally. "Accountability is." That line ran everywhere by morning. In New Jersey, Richard watched the clip alone, volume low, as if turning it down could shrink its reach. Her calm infuriated him more than anger ever could. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't humiliated him. She had simply told the truth and let gravity do the rest. He reached for a bottle he'd sworn off the night before and poured another drink. This time, there was no audience. At Reynolds Aviation Holdings, contracts stacked faster than staff could process them. Operators who had once been dismissive now asked careful questions. Compliance departments requested meetings. Boards requested assurances. Everyone wanted to know how to avoid becoming the next headline. Maya answered each inquiry the same way. Build systems that don't rely on one person's unchecked authority. Some nodded, some bristled. The ones who bristled were noted. On a clear morning, 6 months later, the tarmac at Teterboro buzzed with summer traffic. Heat shimmered above the concrete. Jets taxied in clean lines, choreography refined by decades of repetition. Maya walked beside Sophia, who carried herself differently now. Shoulders back, steps sure, a pilot becoming herself. "You remember the first day you met me?" Maya said. Sophia laughed nervously. "Hard to forget." "I want you to remember how it felt," Maya said. "Not the fear, the pressure. When someone decides you don't belong before you speak." Sophia nodded. "And I want you to remember this," Maya continued, gesturing toward the aircraft ahead of them. "Belonging isn't granted. It's enforced." They reached the gate. A shuttle bus pulled up along the fence line, brakes hissing. Ground crew stepped off, fluorescent vests bright against the sun. One man lagged behind, trash bag slung over his shoulder. Movements slow. Sophia didn't notice. Maya did. Richard had aged again. Lines deeper, hair thinner. He kept his eyes down, focused on the task in front of him. He hadn't expected to see her today. That much was clear from the way his breath caught when he looked up. For a brief moment, neither moved. No cameras. No witnesses who would remember. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a life that had forked sharply and never crossed again. Maya inclined her head once. Not victory. Not pity. Recognition. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to argue. No authority to invoke. No seat to claim. She turned away. Sophia hesitated, glancing back, then followed. The jet lifted minutes later, engines clean, climb smooth. From the ground, It looked like every other departure. From inside, it felt like something else entirely. Richard watched until it disappeared, then returned to his work, the sound of aircraft fading into the background noise. For the first time, the sky meant nothing to him. It didn't have to. The world had moved on. The settlement meetings were quiet, not tense, not dramatic. Quiet in the way that comes after decisions have already been made. Lawyers sat across polished tables with binders they barely opened. Compliance officers spoke in measured phrases. Statements were read aloud, acknowledged, and entered into records that would never trend or go viral. The work of consequences was boring, and that was the point. Maya attended only the ones that mattered. In one room, a senior executive from the charter management firm cleared his throat for the third time and finally spoke. "We failed to intervene sooner," he said. "We trusted seniority over oversight." Maya listened. She didn't interrupt. "We assumed experience equaled judgment," he continued. "We were wrong." "Yes," Maya said. "You were." The word landed without cruelty, without softness either. Another executive leaned forward. "What would you like to see change?" Maya folded her hands on the table. "Transparent reporting, independent review, and a rule that says no one is too valuable to question." A few heads nodded. One didn't. The man at the far end shifted uncomfortably. "That could slow operations." Maya looked at him. "So does an accident." Silence followed. Then pens moved. Outside the building, the city carried on. Traffic flowed. Coffee shops filled. Planes crossed overhead in clean arcs, each one a system working because people trusted the math more than their pride. That was the difference. Weeks later, the FAA issued its final statement. Dry language, precise citations, no names highlighted in bold, but the conclusion was unmistakable. Intentional misrepresentation of aircraft status, failure to comply with crew resource management standards, conduct unbecoming of an airman. The revocation was permanent. Richard received the notice in a thin envelope forwarded twice before it reached him. He sat on the edge of his bed and read it once, then again, then folded it carefully and placed it back inside as if neatness could soften the blow. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one left to tell. The days blurred. Work came and went. Nights stretched. The forums he once lived on had gone quiet, threads locked, usernames deleted or turned hostile. He tried posting once more under a different name. Someone recognized his phrasing within minutes. "Isn't this the guy from the video?" He logged out and never returned. At Reynolds Aviation Holdings, growth was steady, not explosive. Maya rejected 3 contracts that paid well, but came with conditions she didn't like. One wanted her as a figurehead. Another wanted silence clauses. A third wanted reassurance that nothing like this would ever happen again. "It will," she said. "That's why we build for it." She hired slowly, promoted carefully. Every cockpit crew went through the same drills, same evaluations, same authority to speak up, no matter the seat. When someone asked why she insisted on sitting in jump seats on random legs, she shrugged. "I like to watch systems," she said. "People reveal themselves when they think no one important is listening." On a flight out of Denver, turbulence hit hard over the plains. Nothing dangerous, just enough to rattle nerves. The first officer, a man in his 50s with a spotless record, hesitated before speaking. "Captain," he said, "I think we should adjust altitude." Maya nodded immediately. "Agreed. Your call." Later, in smooth air, he looked at her, surprised. "You didn't second-guess me." "I hired you," she said. "Why would I?" He smiled then. Not relief, respect. That was how culture changed, not in press releases, in moments like that. Back in New Jersey, Richard stood in line at the grocery store, hands full of items he didn't remember choosing. A television mounted above the checkout played a muted news segment. Aviation reform. New oversight measures. A familiar face flashed on the screen. Maya standing at a podium, calm as ever. Richard looked away. At home, he boxed up the last of his flight memorabilia. Logbooks, manuals, old epaulettes he'd once polished obsessively. He considered throwing them out, then didn't. Instead, he slid them into the back of a closet and shut the door. Some things didn't need a ceremony. 6 months turned into 9. On a crisp fall morning, Maya stood at the edge of a small runway in Arizona, watching a student pilot taxi in under supervision. The plane bounced slightly on landing, corrected, rolled to a stop. The student climbed out, grinning. "Not pretty," she said. "Safe," Maya replied. "We can work with that." The woman laughed, breathless, proud. Nearby, an older instructor leaned toward Maya. "You know, some people still think you went too far." Maya glanced at him. "Some people always will." He nodded. "Does that bother you?" "No," she said. "What bothers me is what happens when we don't go far enough." That night, she flew solo under a sky thick with stars. No passengers, no cameras, just the hum of engines and the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged, miles below. Highways traced glowing veins through the dark. Lives intersecting, diverging, moving forward whether anyone noticed or not. Richard lay awake in his apartment, listening to a distant aircraft pass overhead. He didn't check the flight path, didn't imagine the cockpit. He let the sound fade without following it. It was easier that way. The sky had made its choice, and it had never needed his permission. The quiet didn't mean it was over. It meant the noise had moved somewhere else. Months after the video stopped trending, its shadow still followed rooms it never entered. Hiring panels hesitated where they once waved through. Senior captains paused before dismissing a concern. Compliance officers asked one more question than they used to. Small changes, uncelebrated, structural. Maya felt it in the briefings, in the way people listened without waiting to interrupt, in the way junior crew spoke earlier, instead of swallowing a doubt. The culture hadn't flipped. It had shifted, like weight redistributing on a long bridge. She was flying less now, by choice. More time in meetings, more time reviewing systems that didn't make headlines, checklists rewritten, reporting lines simplified, a quiet policy that required independent review whenever a flight was grounded for non-mechanical reasons. Another that protected crew who documented concerns, even if the concern made someone uncomfortable. Especially then. At a regional summit in Chicago, a gray-haired captain approached her during a break. His posture was stiff, his tone careful. "I didn't like the way it went down," he said. "Public. Messy." Maya nodded. "I didn't like the way it started." He considered that. Fair. They stood in silence for a moment, watching planes taxi past the windows. "I trained with men like him," the captain said. "Hell, I was one of them." Maya looked at him. And now, he said, "I'm trying to be less wrong." She smiled faintly. "That's work." He nodded, relieved to have the word for it. Across town, in a different kind of room, Richard sat through a mandatory safety orientation for a job that required none of the things he used to believe defined him. The instructor droned on about procedures. Richard took notes anyway. Old habits. His handwriting was still precise, still disciplined, still searching for order. During a break, a younger man recognized him. Not from the video, from somewhere older, somewhere quieter. "You flew cargo out of Anchorage," the man said. "I was a dispatcher." Richard blinked. "Yeah." "You were good," the man said. "Strict, but good." Richard looked down at his notebook. "I used to be." The man hesitated. "You still could be. Just not like that." Richard didn't answer. On a clear afternoon in California, Maya visited a flight school she'd quietly funded for 2 years without putting her name on the building. She walked the hangar floor, hands clasped behind her back, listening to engines start and stop. Students moved with the awkward confidence of people learning to trust their own judgment. A young man approached her, nervous. "My instructor says you own the jet we use for cross-country," he said. Maya smiled. "I own a lot of things." He swallowed. "He also says you don't tolerate excuses." She tilted her head. "I tolerate learning." He nodded, absorbing it. In a small classroom, a student asked a question that made the room go still. "What do you do?" she asked, "when the captain is wrong?" Maya leaned against the desk. "You document," she said. "You speak, you escalate. And if the system punishes you for that, then the system is wrong too." A hand went up. "What if the captain is powerful?" Maya didn't hesitate. Power without accountability is a hazard. The instructor wrote it on the board. Back in New Jersey, Richard walked past the airport fence on his way home. He stopped sometimes, not to watch planes, but to listen. The sound was different now. Less promise, more distance. He no longer imagined the controls, the climb, the way the ground fell away. He imagined nothing. That was safer. One evening, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. "This is Daniel Whitmore." Richard sat down hard. "I won't keep you," Daniel said. "I wanted you to hear this from me." Richard said nothing. "I moved my fleet," Daniel continued. "I also pushed for the oversight you resisted." A pause. "You were good once," Daniel said. "That's why this mattered." Richard closed his eyes. "You calling to finish me off?" "No," Daniel said. I'm calling to end it. Another pause. He could hear the faint hum of an office on the other end. Power at work, but not wielded. You don't get your wings back, Daniel said. But you get your name back if you stop trying to rewrite what happened. The line went quiet. I don't know how, Richard said finally. Daniel answered without judgment. Start by telling the truth to yourself. The call ended. Weeks later, a trade journal ran a piece on operational reforms. No names, no villains. Just a list of changes and a quote from an unnamed owner. Silence protects failure. Light corrects it. Maya read it on a flight to Phoenix, cruising smooth at altitude. The sun dipped low, painting the wing in copper and gold. The cockpit was quiet, the good kind. Systems stable. Crew relaxed. Captain, the first officer said, can I show you something? Always, Maya replied. He pointed out a minor discrepancy in a fuel projection. Not urgent, not dangerous, but real. Good catch, she said. Let's adjust. They did. The plane never noticed the difference. The passengers never knew. That was the point. On the ground, Richard boxed up the last of his books and donated them to the local library. Aviation manuals, weather texts, navigation guides. He kept one. An old notebook with margins full of questions he used to ask before he learned to answer too quickly. He sat at his kitchen table and read one at random. What am I assuming? He closed the notebook and left it on the counter, not hidden this time. The sky that night was clear. Maya landed on time. Smooth. Routine. She shut down the engines and sat for a moment, hands resting on the yoke, feeling the quiet settle. Not triumph, not relief, continuity. She stood and headed down the aisle, greeting crew by name, listening more than she spoke. Outside, the jet cooled. Inside, the work continued. Not loudly. Correctly. The morning sun rose over Teterboro with no regard for who deserved it. It washed across the tarmac, glinting off aluminum and glass, turning every aircraft into something briefly flawless. Maya arrived early, as she always did. No entourage, no announcement. Just a woman walking with purpose, jacket folded over one arm, coffee untouched in her hand. The airport hummed awake around her, familiar and indifferent. She paused at the fence for a moment, watching a regional jet lift cleanly into the sky. The climb was smooth. Textbook. Someone in that cockpit trusted their instruments, trusted their crew, trusted the process. That was enough. Inside the hangar, a small group waited. New hires, junior pilots, mechanics, dispatchers. Not a ceremony. A briefing. The kind that mattered more. Maya stood at the front, hands clasped loosely, eyes moving across faces that still carried a trace of uncertainty. Not fear. Expectation. This company doesn't belong to me, she said. It belongs to the standards we keep. She spoke plainly. About documentation, about escalation, about how silence masquerades as professionalism until it kills something important. She didn't mention Richard. She didn't have to. The lesson was already etched into the walls. When she finished, there was no applause, just nods. Pens moving. People absorbing what they would carry into cockpits and control rooms long after this morning blurred into routine. Outside, the day went on. Across town, Richard sat on a park bench with a paper bag of lunch at his feet. He had learned the routes now. The quieter streets, the hours when the sky was busiest and hardest to ignore. He watched planes cross overhead without tracking them, letting the sound pass through him like weather. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger required an audience. What remained was something thinner. Acceptance, maybe. Or the beginning of it. A child nearby pointed up and laughed as a jet cut a white line across the blue. Richard smiled despite himself. The sky hadn't changed, he had. At Reynolds Aviation Holdings, a report came in from a line pilot about a minor procedural concern. Nothing urgent. Nothing dangerous. Maya forwarded it to the review team with a single line. "Good catch. Thank you for speaking up." She closed her laptop and leaned back, eyes briefly shut. This was the work. Unseen. Uncelebrated. Real. That afternoon, she flew jump seat on a short leg west. No title announced, no explanation given. She watched the crew operate, listened to the cadence of their communication, noted where tension rose and fell. When the first officer hesitated before challenging a call, she waited. He spoke. The captain listened. The correction was made. After landing, Maya thanked them both. Separately. Specifically. Walking down the stairs, she felt the familiar satisfaction of a system functioning as intended. Not perfect, just honest. As the months passed, the story stopped being a story and became a reference point. Training manuals cited it without names. Conferences alluded to it without footage. People learned not because they were told to, but because the cost of not learning had been made visible. That was enough. On a cool evening, Maya stood alone on a ramp in Arizona, watching the horizon deepen from gold to indigo. The air smelled of fuel and dust and promise. She thought of every cockpit she'd entered where she'd been measured before she'd spoken. Every time she'd chosen preparation over reaction. Every moment that had led here. She didn't feel victorious. She felt aligned. Her phone buzzed with a message from Sophia, now flying her own routes. "Smooth flight today. Caught a discrepancy early. Thanks for teaching me to trust my red." Maya smiled and typed back. "You did the work." She slipped the phone into her pocket and turned toward the building, lights warm against the dark. Somewhere, a camera recorded a departure. Another aircraft lifted. Another crew trusted each other enough to speak. Another day passed without incident, which was the point. The sky remained indifferent. It always would be. But the people beneath it had learned something enduring. Power doesn't shout. It documents. Authority doesn't demand. It listens. And integrity doesn't need permission to act. If this story resonated, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment Team Maya wins.